Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 700. And today's date is June 24th, 2015. And the title of this episode is NATO Now Positioning Troops into Iraq Under the Guise of a Training Mission. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. Tomorrow, Thursday, I will be uploading the interview with James Turk. So if you are on the x22report.com email alert system, you'll get an email. If you're subscribed to the X22 Report Spotlight channel, YouTube should email you the information. If not, just come right to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight. It'll bring you to the channel and you can listen to the interview. Or you can go to the x22report.com site. It will be on the right-hand side. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we need to remember back when President Hollande of France came out, and this was during August of 2013, going into 2014. He was telling us that the French economy was on the road to recovery. The same with the EU. They were out there saying this summer of 2013 signals that the European Union is in full recovery. And if we look back in time, we can see, no, the European Union, the French economy, they are not recovering whatsoever. We see the French economy, it continues to deteriorate. And according to the latest French Labor Ministry data, the French job seekers rose by another 0.5%. And we see at this time that the French unemployment has now hit a record high. This is the 80th consecutive month of rising joblessness. So this shows us that whatever these government officials tell us, or you like to call them government employees, it is always the opposite. And I think everyone's starting to catch on now. They just tell you these things to appease you, to make you feel better, that they're doing their job. But guess what? Their interest is not in the people. Their interest is to themselves and to the central bankers. And this is completely evident all across the world in all these private Western central bank countries, because we see all of these countries passing draconian laws that do not benefit the people, but actually work against the people. We see in Greece, the previous governments did nothing to help the people in Greece. Actually, they did the opposite. They did whatever the central bankers wanted. They implemented austerity. They made the economy of the countries worse. And we see now that this new government is at least trying to make it better in their country. And we see Greece pushed a proposal to the central bankers. The central bankers looked at it and said, we're not going to accept this. They wrote a counter proposal. They sent it back to Greece. And Greece says, absolutely not. We're not going to accept this. So right now, we're in a situation where there is no deal. The only deal that was made was with the Greek government and the Russian government for the new pipeline. Now, the central bankers, they submitted a proposal to the Greek government. The Greek government looked at it and they said, this is completely unacceptable. One of the officials said, and he used a Greek expression, to suggest that receiving it was like touching fire. And Cyprus is now thinking to himself, this doesn't make sense. He said, creditors not accepting parametric measures has never happened before, neither in Ireland nor in Portugal nor anywhere. This strange stance can hide two scenarios. The central bankers don't want any type of agreement, or they are serving specific interests in Greece. So Cyprus knows what's going on here. He sees that there are specific interests in Greece that are being served by all of this. And again, we know that Goldman Sachs and a lot of other bankers were involved in creating this debt illegally, this odious debt. And right now, there is no deal whatsoever. We see that there was leaked NSA intercepts between Holland and others who were having a meeting behind Merkel's back because he feared of the Greek exit. He was fearing the potential impact of Greece eventually exiting the Eurozone on the French economy. So he held secret meetings with the German Social Democratic Party leaders behind Angela Merkel's back in 2012. And this is coming from the NSA intelligence reports released by WikiLeaks. Holland stressed that the meeting would be secret. The intelligence report dated May 22nd, 2012 says the agency comments suggested that Holland seemed worried that if word were to get out that Paris is seriously considering the possibility of a Greek exit, it would deepen the crisis. Holland complained that nothing of substance was achieved during his talks with Merkel, so he decided to invite the SPD chairman, Sigmar Gabriel, to Paris for talks. Because they are nervous of how this could have a ripple effect in all these different countries. And it would. If or when Greece decides to say, okay, enough is enough, we're going to default, we're not going to pay any of this back, we're going to slide over to the BRICS system, to Russia. Because when you look at this, if they decided to go with the European Union and stay with them and accept a deal, we know that the European Union and the central bankers are going to say, you know that deal with Putin? This cannot happen. You're going to have to agree to the other pipeline. And I don't see how this is going to play out at this time, except that Greece is buying time and getting ready to move with Russia and the BRICS. I mean, of course, this can all change. Things happen. But this is the way it looks right now. Here in the United States, well, they're continually trying to push that we're in a recovery, but we could be in a little bit of a slump, and this is double talk to say we are collapsing. Because we've seen this before, like I mentioned in yesterday's report, about how the National Association of Realtors continually tells us that everything is fine all throughout 2007 going into 2008, how people should purchase homes while the entire real estate market was collapsing. The same thing could be said for the stock market. The same thing could be said for employment. They continually tell us that everything is fine. This is what a recovery looks like. But what are we seeing? We are seeing that things are not okay. And we see the first quarter GDP numbers have come in. Of course, they've been revised, massaged, manipulated. After printing at a negative 0.7, they revised them, and they came in around negative 0.2. Now, what's very interesting about all of this is that if you strip away Obamacare and you strip away the harsh winter, and if you strip away the inventory restocking, the first quarter GDP is really negative 2%. The United States is not growing. Now, you have to remember, in 2014, the IMF, the Fed, the U.S. government predicted that 2015 was going to be an incredible year. We're going to see 2.5% to 3% GDP. Everything will be recovering. Housing is going to bounce back. Retail is going to bounce back. Unemployment is going to continually drop. Now, of course, the statistical numbers they can manipulate to make it look like this is what's happening. Unemployment continually dropping, which makes no sense because retail is contracting. Stores are closing. People are getting laid off. We see more and more corporations laying off people. Of course, the U.S. government will not report this because of budget constraints. They had to get rid of that department that created that layoff report, and they did this back in 2013. So we really don't get a good idea of what layoffs are like, except when we go to private companies and we see, yeah, there are a lot of layoffs. And we keep getting information from these huge corporations that they're laying off not 1,000, 2,000, but tens of thousands of people. And we can see when we look at this this shows us that this economy with the debt cannot be sustained. And the second quarter GDP is not going to be any better. Now, of course, yes, can they pump the bubbles up? We've seen them do it before, because you have to remember, this economy is not a people economy. It's not driven by work and by people purchasing and people purchasing homes. It is created and built on the central bank bubble system. And every time things start to fall apart, all they do is manipulate the calculations and pump more free money, which allows investment companies, hedge funds to go out and purchase thousands upon thousands of houses, keep them off the market, rented if they can. It allows the banks to go to the short-term window, pay no interest on the money, put it into the stock market, and then remove it from the stock market and repay what they took without any interest whatsoever or penalties or anything. We see the auto industry and the housing industry is now getting more and more people into the market because they're accepting subprime people. They don't care if they have credit. So interest rates are zero, or some places negative. They're accepting subprime people. They're giving free money to investment companies. They're channel stuffing the auto dealerships. And all of this is to keep this economy alive, even though it is contracting everywhere, in retail, in housing, in auto sales. We see bubbles forming everywhere: student loan, derivative, treasury bond, auto, housing, stock market, you name it. These are the bubbles. And when you're in a bubble economy, it completely comes crumbling down and it pops. We saw it back in 1929, 2001, 2008, and now we are seeing it again. This time it's worse though. We have a lot more people that don't have credit, a lot of people that lost their wealth, a lot of people who cannot find that same full-time job since the last crisis, who've just been living paycheck to paycheck. Home ownership is at its lowest since like 1987 or something like that. And we understand there's 93 plus million people who want jobs but just can't find them. We understand that the college graduates coming out of college who get their degree in a certain field can't find that job in that field. And this is why the U.S. government central bankers would love for them to write off their loans, declare bankruptcy, so the government can bail out that bubble. They don't want it to pop, because if it does, no one will be paying into it, because you can't write it off. They can't go to the taxpayers and say, oh, we need you to cover this. This is why we saw the first case with Corinthian College. This sets the precedence to say, okay, they were allowed to write it off. What other college? And you'll see this will continue on, because this is what they need to do. We understand, and I reported on this, that China now is working with London to set the gold prices. And China is saying that they will be able to affect the price of gold because China's gold reserves. Demand for them and the share of gold production on the gray market is very large. Beijing will in time be able to authoritatively set the international price of gold to Chinese and foreign businesses, jewelers, and investors, becoming the world's gold market maker. And this is where we will see gold start to increase. Because you have to remember, they have the Shanghai Exchange, and when they settle, it is in physical gold, not paper. Now, we understand governments around the world, I mean, in Canada, Australia, in France, the United States, and other European countries, they have been pushing and chipping away at the people's rights. They've been basically creating these draconian laws. We see here in the United States, they're trying to convince everyone that you really don't have free speech. There is a free speech zone 100 miles in from the border saying that you do not have any rights in this area. They set up cages and they say this is where you can speak freely. Colleges are setting up designated areas saying this is where you can speak freely. And Jefferson mapped out stages of government, and it looks like we are at the last stage of government. We are moving toward a government by sheer force. This is the third and final stage of government as identified by Thomas Jefferson. Traditionally, government begins to lose power, and as it does, it tightens the noose around the economy. And we have been seeing this. Think about it for a second. Obamacare, FATCA, TPP, carbon tax. This is the sign that the government is using force now on the people to keep everything alive because they don't have the revenue coming into the government. They also push out draconian laws, removing the rights of the people. They end up spying on the people. They try to remove the weapons from the people. And this is what we are seeing right now. We are in this stage. And along the way, the government likes to convince you that you still have a say in everything, that you still have your rights. And they do this with all different methods. I mean, one of them was the petition site that the White House set up. Because they set it up saying, you know, we the people have a right, and if the amount of people signing the petition reaches 100,000, the government will respond. Well, this hasn't held true, because with Edward Snowden, signatures went above 100,000, and to this day, the government has not responded to this whatsoever. Some critics say this service is a propaganda tool. The authorities answer the softball questions. You know, can Super Bowl Sunday be a national holiday? But anything political, serious, they avoid it. And this is exactly what they are doing. And we can see at this point that this is a propaganda tool to make you believe you have a say. But you can see the government doesn't answer those petitions that are serious. They don't answer the petitions that the people are worried about and have concerns. They answer things like, you know, should Justin Bieber be deported? Because those are not political. Those are fluff. And that's why they use it. But when we look at this, we realize that they have agendas. Thomas Jefferson is saying the government is now at the point that they're going to use force because the government is collapsing. The economy is collapsing. And this is why John Kerry signed the UN Arms Treaty back on September 25th, 2013. Doesn't mean it's ratified. It means that as Secretary of State, he signed it, he endorsed it, and they're waiting for this to be ratified. Now, what this tells us is that the UN and the U.S. government agrees they would like to disarm the American people. Right now, the United Nations, because of what happened in Charleston, South Carolina, is calling right now to disarm legal gun owners so that the only people with guns in America will be the heavily armed government and its agents. And they're trying to push gun legislation, and they're trying to push the UN Arms Treaty through. They use these type of events to push certain agendas, and we see this is being pushed right now. But in the wake of yet another horrible senseless shooting, of course we know this was all created by the government, picked out a patsy, made sure he was mentally disabled, mentally unable to operate unless he was on some type of medication. And when you remove that medication, things really get out of whack. And we see that the government, the corporate spokespeople, is using the cause and effect. When something creates pain, they want to stop the pain. Cause and effect. Oh my God, we saw a mass shooting. There's pain. So what do? We got to take away the guns. Let's look no further. That's the problem. Well, the UK right now, they took away all the guns. And all the same criminals turned to knives, clubs, axes. Now they're trying to get rid of the knives there. It doesn't matter. Because if someone was going to do something, and if they can't find a gun, they'll find a bat. They'll find an axe. They'll create a bomb. Makes no difference. And people say, well, with a knife, you can't go around killing people. Well, yeah, you can. People have gone on rampages and killed 10, 13 people with a knife. But when we look at this, we see that Obama wants to do something about all of this. Presidents always say, after all, it's always some line about how protecting the American people is their number one responsibility. Actually, that's completely not true. In fact, the word protect appears just one time in Article 2 of the Constitution, the part that deals with the president's responsibilities. And it has nothing to do with protecting the American people. The word is used in reference to the oath of office that every president has taken since George Washington to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Funny thing about the Constitution is that it includes the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Whenever a politician talks about gun control, they express the most bizarre logic. They think guns in the hands of civilians are a danger to society, whereas guns in the hands of the government, they are protecting society. And whenever there's some heinous type of incident, like police brutality, they tell us that this is an isolated incident and it does not reflect the police community in general. It's only this instance right here, this event. So we should use the same logic, because they're out there calling for gun confiscation, gun laws, and we should say, no, this is an isolated incident. This is a person who's on medication. This is a person who was set up by the FBI to push an agenda, and it does not reflect on the millions of people who are responsible owners of firearms. One crazed lunatic certainly does not reflect everyone, does it? So the government is not there to protect us. They're there to uphold the Constitution and what it stands for. But again, they're not working for the people anymore. They're working for their own agendas. They're working for the central bankers. They're working for the corporations. They don't care about the people. They would love to remove the Constitution, the rights of the people. They've done it quite a bit. They're just ripping it apart. And we see, as time goes on, they will continue to do this. Now, the Pentagon's new thick book of instructions for waging war the legal way says that terrorists also can be journalists now. The description appears in a 1,176-page footnoted Department of Defense Law of War manual. The manual pushes aside the George W. Bush era label of unlawful enemy combatant for Al-Qaeda and the like. The new term of choice, unprivileged belligerent. The manual defines them this way. In general, journalists are civilians. However, journalists may be members of the armed forces, persons authorized to accompany the armed forces, or unprivileged belligerents. And we can see right now that they're just changing the wording so they can take the journalists out. And we see this is all being prepared because they don't want certain stories covered. They want to quiet certain people. We saw it happen in Ferguson. We saw it happen in Baltimore. We see it happening in Ukraine. And this will spread because they don't want certain things reported, either be on the corporate media or the alternative media. If they can't control what they're saying, they will get rid of those people saying it. And we see this in Ukraine because you have to remember, that government, and not just Ukraine, in Libya, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, those countries that are controlled by the central bankers' U.S. government, look at their actions. Take what you're seeing there, and this is what they want to do here in the United States. And you can see they're pushing every single law, every single way they possibly can to remove the sovereignty, the rights, the Constitution from the people. And we see the Senate push through the trade bill fast track. 13 Senate Democrats broke with the party Tuesday to help advance Obama's trade agenda, moving fast track legislation past a key vote and all but assuring its final passage. Jefferson, a senator, said the following: Americans increasingly believe that their country isn't serving its own citizens. They need look no further than what happened in Congress. They've transferred congressional power to the executive branch and in turn to a transnational Pacific Union and the global interest who will help write its rules. The same routine plays out over and over again. We are told a massive bill must be passed. All the business lobbyists and leaders tell how grand it will be, and that'll be rushed through. It must be rushed through before the voters spoil the plan. Well, the ordinary American never asked for the plan. They don't want the plan. They want no part of the plan. They resist the plan. And those people who resist it, who don't want it, they are scorned and mocked. That they're crazy. This is good for the country. Like NAFTA. Like going to war in Iraq. Like Ukraine. It's all good for the country. No, it's good for the central bankers, the U.S. government, and corporate interests. It is remarkable that so much energy has been expended on advancing these things that Americans oppose and preventing the things Americans want. Because again, the government does not exist. It's not for the people, by the people. It is for the bankers, for the corporations. Thousands of loyal Americans have been laid off and forced to train the foreign workers brought in to fill their jobs. And what does Washington do? Absolutely nothing. They pass laws that accelerate this process. They're not bringing back jobs. They're not helping out. They're not spurring economic growth. They're not doing anything for the people. They're doing everything for the corporations and the bankers. This is what we are seeing today. We see out in Armenia, riots, protests are being pushed, and guess what? It's being pushed by the United States government central bankers. Thousands of people took into the streets in the city protesting increased electricity pricing. The rallies ended in violent clashes with police. Protesters are rejecting an offer to meet the Armenian president. No, we don't want to meet with him because that would solve the problem here. We want to sit in the street. We want to continue protesting. We don't want to meet with anyone and discuss what's going on. Instead, they rather protest. And this is starting to look like what happened in Ukraine. Armenia is now close to a coup d'etat because the people are coming out with firearms. People are out there and they're being backed by the United States government central bankers. The people want democracy. They want fair electricity prices. The government must fall. Now, of course, once these people, if they should do it, take over Armenia, those people who object to the puppet government, they will be called terrorists. But right now, the United States government central bankers want the government overthrown. And when we look at this is starting to look like what happened in Kiev. And we have to understand, why are they doing this in Armenia? It makes no sense unless you look at what's going on in Armenia. Protocol number 5 of the American-Russian Agreement of 1995 extended the deployment of the Russian military base till 2044. That was signed in August of 2010. Right now, Gazprom is going to purchase the Iranian-Armenian pipeline. Armenia is going to sell it to Gazprom in Russia. We're seeing the protests in Macedonia. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something in Greece, and now we're seeing it in Armenia. Because again, the U.S. government central bankers, they don't want this to happen. First of all, they want the Russian base out of that country, and they don't want Russia to have this pipeline. They don't want Macedonia to build the Turkish Stream. They don't want Greece to build the Turkish Stream. This is why this is happening right now. And we're going to have to watch this very carefully to see how it goes, because we saw how Ukraine went. And none of these work out. The country will be put into chaos. The economy will fail. People will suffer. We'll have humanitarian crisis. And there will be war in this country. We've seen it time and time again in each one of these countries where the U.S. government steps in and overthrows the government. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the situation there getting worse. The economy is collapsing. Putin is saying that no one is following the Minsk II agreement. No one's abiding by it. Kiev is not getting penalized for violating the Minsk II agreement. And right now, Putin kind of struck back and said Moscow can no longer give Ukraine gas discounts due to the current drop in oil prices. So they're going to have to pay the same price that every other country is paying at this point. So we're going to have to see how this plays out, because as we know, the country is not bringing in any revenue. They're being put further and further into debt. And that means the US, the EU, the IMF, the ECB is going to have to give them more and more debt. And we're going to have to see how this plays out at this point. Putin has signed in order to extend the counter-sanctions for another year. This is the food ban, because what Europe decided to do, what the US decided to do, where they extended their sanctions. If they dropped the sanctions at this point, Putin would have dropped the food ban. But of course, the United States government pushed Europe, convinced them that the sanctions are good for them. They need to do this because of Russia and the aggressive nature of Russia. But the economies of these European nations, they are suffering. And we'll have to see how much they can take of this before they say, okay, enough is enough, no more sanctions. Now, the EU extended their sanctions for 6 months. Russia decided, you know what, let's just extend them for a year and let's see what Europe does in 6 months. If they get rid of it, we will drop the food ban. Kiev forces have violated the Minsk II agreement in the last 24 hours 50 times by firing 50 shells. And this is ongoing non-stop. Ukraine is going to introduce an electronic border control in Donbass starting July 7th. How interesting. The head of Ukraine's national security said that the authorities are planning to set up electronic control systems at the crossing points. Citizens will be able to apply for special permit via email, or they can fill out an application. Now, those people who apply for this, their information will be checked in a database. And if you are part of the terrorist force, you will not be able to cross. And you can see what they're doing is they're correlating all the names right now in this database. That's the purpose of this, and to keep people from going in and out, and to keep track of what's going in and out, and to keep people and the forces in a certain area. And what we're seeing right now is control of the Donbass region. And the people in the Donbass region are saying, well, wait a minute, you can't do this, because under the Minsk II agreement, point 9, reinstatement of full control of the state border by the government of Ukraine throughout the conflict area should start on day 1 after local elections and end after the comprehensive political settlement. They had no elections. Again, not following the Minsk II agreement. They don't care about the Minsk II agreement. They're getting ready for a major offensive. And every action that we're looking at shows us that this is the path they are taking. Now, we understand with Iran, the sanctions were put in place. And the sanctions really hurt the oil sales of Iran. And basically, when the sanctions were introduced, it cut the export of oil from 2.6 million barrels per day down to 1.4 million barrels per day, almost in half, because Iran was selling the oil not using the dollar. They were using any currency, gold, and they wanted to stop this. This is all about taking control of the country and the natural resources and propping up the petrodollar. This is why we see all these talks about nuclear reactors. It has nothing to do with nuclear. They're not creating a nuclear weapon. The IAEA is in there inspected, never found a thing. They signed the NPT. They have numerous inspections. There's no proof anywhere. Actually, a lot of the documentation was created by the CIA and Israel. And a lot of it is completely fake, phony, and false. And they've never found anything. Right now, we understand the situation in the Middle East is getting worse. The people in each one of these countries are fighting back. And NATO right now is poised to announce the return to Iraq. Of course, this is for training. And we know that this has nothing to do with training. This has nothing to do with advisors. This is bringing in forces into a certain area. Now, remember, the authorization for war has not been signed here in the United States, so it's very difficult to bring in the forces they need into Iraq to push the people back and then eventually get into Syria. And then have those same troops, because as we know, the authorization for war allows the U.S. to go after the Islamic State. And they can go into each one of these countries. Without it, they cannot. So they need NATO right now to help out. And this is why NATO is coming down into this area. And this has nothing to do with training. This is getting ready for an event. And it's getting ready for a major offensive into Syria and the rest of the countries where they're losing control. We see the U.S. is out there saying, okay, we admit it. We've been paying the Syrian rebels about $400 per month. Now, we knew about this. We reported on this long time ago. We actually had other individuals come forward saying that they were paid for each recruit that they get into the Islamic State. Now, of course, when this came out, everyone said, this is crazy. The U.S. is not paying salaries to these people. That's conspiracy theory. Now it's true, because guess what? The truth has come out. And the U.S. has no explanation for it, so they have to admit it. Okay, we admit it. We're paying the mercenaries to remove Assad. That's basically what they're saying. And this is what we're seeing right now. We see more false flags. We see missiles, actually bottle rockets, were fired into Israel from the Gaza Strip. And of course, the Islamic State is taking responsibility for this. Why would they be in the Gaza Strip right now? Why would they fire it from there? Why wouldn't they fire it from Syria, which borders along Israel? It makes no sense. Well, a couple agendas here. We know that Israel's mounting another offensive into Gaza. They're trying to make their case. We know that the war crimes are coming up in the UN. We also know that if they can say that the Islamic State is firing these ridiculous, firecrackers at Israel into the desert, they have a case to go into Syria because that's where the Islamic State is. So we see many agendas being formed here because what we're seeing is Israel will support the Free Syrian Army and move in through the south. We also see that Turkey is supporting the north, and the United States government central bankers, along with Israel, UK, and other countries, have the Islamic State, which is the proxy army, which is towards the east, moving towards the west. They're all closing in on Damascus. Putin has already given a warning that he will continually back Assad, and this will turn out to be an all-out war. Now, we have U.S. government officials, security experts out there saying that these cyber attacks from China, Russia, that got all the federal employees' information, this is very dangerous because these countries could sell the information to the Islamic State. Look how they're trying to take all of this and put it all together to make us believe that we're going to go to war with the Islamic State, China, and Russia. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to connect the dots. And they're saying that this massive breach of government databases is very worrying because China could decide to use the data for its own purposes, sell it to the highest bidder purely for profit, and they could sell this to the Islamic State just to get back at the United States, which is absolutely ridiculous. We know that these breaches were caused by the NSA. We know this is being done for many different agendas to make it look like another country is cyber attacking the United States, and the other agenda is to get the cyber legislation through. That's all it is. It's almost like when we heard the warnings coming out from DHS that there are terrorists in the mall. Now, during this time, they were discussing the budget, and DHS might not have been funded. So they made up all these warnings. As soon as they were funded and the budget went through, the warnings just disappeared. Actually, if and when, I don't know if they're going to, they pass CISA, you will see all these cyber attacks just disappear. Because now they get our private information from the corporations, everything is fine. Because private information, knowing your purchases, knowing your bank account, knowing where you are, what you're doing, who you're talking to, that helps fight cyber criminals. No, it doesn't. This helps the government, the central bankers. We see the New York Times and other corporate media out there saying that homegrown radicals, white people, they are dangerous right now. They're worse than the jihadists, than the Islamic State. They are the homegrown terrorists. Well, they're doing this to show that those people who don't agree with the government, those people who would reject the government, they are terrorists. We see the same thing in Ukraine. Those people who reject the puppet government, they are the terrorists. We see it in Yemen. We see it in Libya. We see it anywhere the U.S. government is, and they overthrew the government there and they put in a puppet regime. Those people who object, they are now the terrorists. When the U.S. government is trying to get the government out and put in a puppet government, they back the people. See how this is played? But we see that they're using this agenda and they're pushing other agendas like removing the Confederate flag. Now we see all the corporations, we see state governments saying, okay, the Confederate flag is done, it's gone. And they're even saying, should U.S. military bases that are named after Confederates be renamed? What they're in the process of doing right now is stripping away the history of the United States. They're stripping away what it took to get freedom. They're even saying that, and this is coming from CNN, if the Thomas Jefferson Memorial should be removed because he owned slaves. So what I see happening right now is they're looking at anything that supports freedom, anything that supports the history of the United States. They just want to erase it all, so people can't recognize it anymore. People don't know who Thomas Jefferson is. People don't know what happened in the Civil War. People don't know what happened anywhere. And this is what they're doing. Just like they're trying to get rid of our rights and remove the Constitution. They're doing whatever they possibly can because they realize that they're going to have to control the entire situation. And they can't have anyone believing in freedom, in overthrowing the government. They can't have that whatsoever. So they have to erase it. Just like Common Core, where they're rewording the Bill of Rights. They're teaching the children nothing about freedom, nothing about the Constitution, nothing about how the country was built or founded and why we have these freedoms. They're trying to convince them that the rights are privileges that could be taken away at any time, which they are not. So we can see at this time, this is what the government is doing. This goes back to what Thomas Jefferson said. This is government by force. This is not government for the people, by the people anymore. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.